Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I want to review the new teaser for Season 2 of Star Trek Picard. And the teaser showed us something that a lot of fans really wanted to see, and it does have the potential to be amazing. But with all these high hopes, there is the potential of a big disappointment if they don't do it right. And the thing I'm talking about is the comeback of Q, one of the most interesting characters in Star Trek TNG, one of the most mysterious, one of the most fascinating because it's so amazing of an idea of a being, an entity which is basically all powerful. So this is the place where science fiction basically goes into fantasy. And that's another thing they should be very careful with because I think Star Trek should be mostly based on science fiction, things that might be possible in reality someday and not just do magic stuff. And so with things like the Q, it runs the risk of being too magical and too fantastical, and so it's basically turning Star Trek into Harry Potter instead of being science fiction. So that's another fear I have, even though I'm not against the idea of using Q, but I think Q worked best in all those episodes where it was comedic. He was basically brought in for comedy episodes, and once in a while it was a combination of comedy and also some kind of interesting character story. And probably the best Q episode was the episode Tapestry, when he brought Picard back into his own past and gave him a second chance to do things differently. And some of the dialogue by Picard in this teaser sounds kind of similar to that. He talks about second chances and stuff like that. So hopefully if they do something like that, which is use Q as a comedic character but in kind of a serious situation with some kind of a message to it in the end, then it might be great. So hopefully that's what they'll do. That was the best Q episode. If they do something like this again and manage to pull it off correctly, it might be great. It will be a great comeback, and they might do something even better, even bigger, do something epic with it, and it might tie beautifully to the final episode of TNG when Q was apparently going to tell Picard something that he's going to encounter in the future, but then kind of withheld it. He didn't say it, and he told Picard, "You'll find out one day," and then said goodbye and said, "If you're really lucky, I might drop by from time to time." So if they actually do a sequel to that idea and reveal something epic, amazing that Picard will be involved with, something that Q knew from Advanced is going to happen, something really metaphysical and epic and philosophical, and also a character study, it might be great. And we also know that Guinan is coming back this season because we know Whoopi Goldberg is going to be on the show, and so that is an opportunity to finally explain that scene when Guinan met Q and they said that they knew each other from before, from 2 centuries before, and then Guinan did some kind of gesture which indicates as if she can protect herself from the powers of Q. And Guinan was also always a very mysterious character, and I thought that also was a huge missed opportunity that they never explained that. Like, it always annoys me till this day that that basically led to nothing and was never explained. And I even remember when Enterprise was on the air, I kept waiting for an episode where Guinan will show up because, you know, she doesn't age. She can show up in Enterprise, and Q can show up in Enterprise without saying his name, and so they can actually show what happened before with these characters and why they hate each other. They could have done it in an episode of Enterprise. That could have been interesting, but they didn't. So by doing a sequel, they might actually explain that backstory which was never explained and fill that little hole and tie that loose end. And if it's done well, I'll be very happy about that. One potential problem is how will they explain the fact that Guinan aged? They can explain a Q looking like he's old because he can just say, "I choose to look this way, to look like Jean-Luc," just like he always put his uniform to look like the uniform of Picard. He can also age himself to be in the same age as Picard, and so it's not a problem. And he actually did that in that last episode of TNG, in the full version of that episode. He can simply choose to look older, so that's no problem. But how will they explain Guinan? Guinan is not supposed to be aging. She looked exactly the same as she did in TNG 500 years before that. So are you telling me that in just 20 years after TNG, suddenly she started aging rapidly? I guess they can explain it that it happens with her species after a certain age. Suddenly they start aging. I guess they can say that, but I'm hoping they'll do something more creative. Maybe they can CGI her to look younger, but that's a very expensive option, and they couldn't even do that for Data. And Data looked pretty terrible in season 1, and they couldn't fix him completely. And so probably they will not try to do it with Guinan. Most likely they will give some kind of excuse. I offered the theory before that maybe Picard should meet her in some kind of mental asylum and Guinan will be all crazy in a padded room and she'll be talking about alternate timelines and so many people changed the past and it messed up her perception. She doesn't know what's going on because she has the memory of multiple timelines and it's not the correct timeline. If she says something like that, that will be very funny and she can act crazy and all of that. You know, Whoopi Goldberg is a good actress. I think she can pull it off and it will be interesting. Have like a Sarah Connor scene of her freaking out in a mental asylum. That could be a great scene. Maybe Picard rescues her and maybe she will meet Q later on and maybe it will be revealed that some other Q gave her some abilities to protect her from this Q, and so they can tie all kinds of things together in a very clever, interesting way that will be a lot of fun. And maybe Q loses his powers again, so that was also a good episode of TNG, and so they can do so much interesting, good stuff with it that I can't help being excited about all of this, but I'm also very worried that they will mess it up. And there's another interesting thing that we see in this scene that they show us of Picard's room, which looks different than it was in season 1. Now it looks much more like what Picard's office should look like because it's much more similar to his style. So we see the painting of the Enterprise, we see the model of the Stargazer, we see a bunch of books. This book, The Dark Tunnel, is one of the novels of Dixon Hill, which he was a fan of during TNG. And there's the book Paradise Lost, which might be a reference to the state of the Federation right now. You know, the Federation was described as a paradise, and yet it's apparently crumbling or being changed into something not so pretty. And we see what looks like that little artifact that Galen gave him, which he left back with the wreckage of the Enterprise D, which always annoyed me. And I explained it away by it being a replica, and maybe the real one he put in a museum or sent back to Earth, and maybe the one he had on the ship was just a replicated version of it, and that's why he left it. That was always a little bit annoying. So we have something similar here, and the chair looks really similar to his chair on the Enterprise, and even that covering on the chair I think was a gift he got from the Mintakans in the end of the episode Who Watches the Watchers, and he put it on his chair and it was on all his chairs ever since, so that's also a nice touch. And of course the painting on the Enterprise, which looks almost the same as the one he had in his ready room. And even that little statue of the horse, I think it belonged to his brother, and we saw it in his house in the episode Family. So it could have survived the fire, it might be the same exact piece or a replica. And so all of this shows me that they are paying attention to all of these details, and maybe they're trying harder this time, and so maybe it's a good sign. But the most interesting item in this place is this tablet, which looks really similar to the Bajoran tablet which Sisko found in an ancient city on Bajor. It then broke, and then it released the Paraith and the Prophet, which then fought each other, and it was said to be part of the Reckoning, which is the final event of the Bajoran religion. And Kai Wynn actually stopped it from being fulfilled by flooding the station with Chroniton radiation, which forced these entities to leave the station, so they never finished the final battle. So this thing that we see on Picard's table looks really similar to that, and so I'm wondering, is it just a reference, is it just an Easter egg, or if it's actually going to be part of the story? And we know that Picard is into archaeology and all of that, so it will be fun to see it play a part in this season, that maybe he discovered something archaeological and it led him to some new adventure which might end up saving the whole galaxy or something. And if it will involve the Bajoran religion and the prophets and all of that, it will be interesting to tie it with Q, because, you know, I was always curious what will happen if a Q meets a prophet, like who is more powerful. I'm guessing the Q are more powerful. On the other hand, the prophets control time, so technically they should be the most powerful beings, and so they're basically gods who know everything from advance, and so you cannot really even understand them. And what they also showed us in this teaser is time moving backwards. We see the hourglass getting refilled as if time is in reverse, and the monologue by Picard is talking about how time is the real final frontier and all of that, and there's a clock in the scene. And so time seems to be so important in this teaser, and they show us this bajoran artifact which ties directly to the prophets, who are the masters of time in Star Trek. Basically, for them time is not linear, it all happened already for them. So technically they should be the most powerful beings in the universe, because even Q seemed to be mostly limited by time, even though he could apparently time travel in some places, but time was still linear for him. So it will actually be interesting if they tie it all to the bajoran prophet somehow, even though that's something in Deep Space Nine that I always found a little bit too fantastical, a little bit too religious, and not so much hard science fiction, even though we can explain it away with science fiction of them living in the wormhole outside of time and all of that. But the way they did it in the end of season 7 of Deep Space Nine was kind of too fantastical, too much like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and I didn't like it that much. But who knows, maybe they'll even bring back Sisko finally. I did hear a rumor that there might be a show about Sisko, so maybe they're planting the seeds here. Maybe they will bring Sisko back even in this show. That might be interesting. You know, if Avery Brooks returns, it might be great as well. That's another loose end that I always wanted to get resolved somehow. But again, only if it's done well. If it's done in a lame way or a disappointing way or a stupid way, then it's better not to touch it at all. Only if it's done well, then I'll like it. So are they really going to go into all this epic stuff and all this fantasy stuff? If so, it's very risky. They should be very careful with that. And how will all of this tie with what happened in season 1? It seems like a totally different kind of story to what came before, so it's a little strange. And whatever happened with those robot tentacles that wanted to invade our galaxy, will they not try to invade anyway, even though that portal got closed on them? Will they not have any ability to invade the galaxy some other way? Maybe that's why Picard will ask you for help. Maybe he knows there is no way to save the galaxy except by asking help from higher beings like the prophets or the Q. Maybe that's why he looked after that artifact, to try to make contact with them, make contact with Sisko maybe. And then maybe he goes to talk with Guinan in order to find a way to call Q for help, and that's how Guinan will fit into it. So he'll first go to Guinan to try to make contact with Q, then he'll find this artifact to make contact with the prophets, and only then Q shows up. So I don't know, maybe none of this was going to happen. Maybe it's all just teasers, all just references for the sake of it, to get us curious, and none of all of this stuff will happen. Maybe Q will just show up for 2 seconds and disappear, just like he did in Lower Decks. You know, there was one episode when Q suddenly shows up and he has like 5 seconds scene, and then that's it. So that was a huge cop-out in my opinion. Like, what's the point to bring someone like that into a show and then not do anything at all with him? So if that's what they're going to do, that will be such a huge cop-out, such a huge disappointment. If they don't do it well, if it's just there just to be there with no actual purpose, that will be extremely disappointing. But if they do it well, if it's written well, if it's done in an interesting way, and if it ties all kinds of loose ends together, that will be great in my opinion. So I'm kind of optimistic about that potential, but also very worried, trying not to keep my hopes too high as not to be so disappointed and annoyed later on. It might ruin what is a perfect ending to TNG. You know, that last scene with Q, when he says goodbye to Picard and he implies something interesting in Picard's future, something he's going to discover in the future that is about the very nature of existence and all of those things. That sounds so mysterious, and maybe it's better off to simply leave it ambiguous for us never to know what will happen next, because it's something so big that it cannot be made in a TV show. So maybe it's better not to touch it at all. But if they're going to go into it, if they're going to do it, they better deliver something epic and amazing. Otherwise, fans will simply not accept it and might hate it. And so I'm holding fingers for it to be good. I'm really, really hoping that they do pull it off and do something amazing. That would be great if that will happen. So that's what I had to say about the whole Q thing. As for the other things, we don't really see any footage from the show. We do see Picard's house again, and it's the exact same house, only his room now looks much different, much more similar to what I would expect from Picard. And so it begs the question, why wasn't it this way in the previous season? I guess I can explain it by the fact that he was so disappointed by Starfleet that maybe he didn't want to see all this stuff to do with Starfleet in his office every day, so that's why he put it all away in the Starfleet Museum and locked it away, and didn't even want to keep it in a spare room in his huge house. No, he just locked it all away because he didn't want to look at it. And only now when he regained his faith in Starfleet, maybe now he brought it all out of the museum and put it in his house again. And why is he even in his house? Didn't he now get a new crew and a new ship and he can now go and explore the galaxy? So why is he even back at his house at all? What happens with the other characters? Where is that ship? Where is Captain Wolverine and Black Sarah Connor and 7 of 69? Where are all these guys? Are they still on the same ship, hanging out in space, just waiting for Picard to call them to go on another adventure? Or is the show going to restart everything and just do a completely different story with a different ship, a different crew? I guess it's possible, but most likely it will be the same ship again. And maybe Picard is using the ship to just go and explore archaeological stuff. And just by accident he will stumble on this tablet of the Bajorans, which contains the ancient spirits of the prophets and pirates. And it will open the door for a whole new adventure, which is more fantasy. I guess we'll wait and see. So anyway, that's all I have to say about it for today. Let me know what you think and we'll continue the discussion in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.